Hello everyone and welcome back to The Lost Planeswalker. You're here with me, Jesse, The Lost Planeswalker, and today is video 6 of 7 of my 7-day series making commander decks for the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and today we have Inti, Seneschal of the Sun. I don't know if I said that right, but let's just move on and see what Inti does. 1 in a red, legendary creature, human knight. Whenever you attack, you may discard a card. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature. It gains trample until end of turn. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, you exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until your next end step. So this commander is very, not unique, I should say. I mean, we have a lot of exile stuff in red, but he kind of does it in a different way. You know, you're getting to give your stuff trample, which is great. You're putting a +1/+1 counter on it, and you're just making it easier for you to cast more and more stuff. And this might be the red commander, mono red commander anyways, with exile that we've been waiting for. So I built this based around exile, playing cards from exile, dealing damage because you're playing stuff from exile. So I want to see how much value we can get from that. So starting off, like always, I'm talking about the land base. It is just mountains in this deck. If you're interested in building your own red mana base, go ahead, but I didn't want to waste your guys' time. And now I want to move straight into exile matters cards. All of these cards are going to exile creatures or care about you exiling stuff. Are going to help you do stuff in the process. So starting off, we have Atushi, the Blazing Sky, Burgi, God of Storytelling, and Chandra, Torch of Defiance. Atushi has flying and trample, and when it dies, we can either exile the top 2 cards of our library, and until our next turn, we may play those cards, or we can create 3 treasure tokens. Burgi, God of Storytelling, says whenever you cast a spell, you add red mana. Until end of turn, you don't lose mana as steps and phases end, and creatures you control can boast twice during their turns instead of once. But when we flip her, we get Harnafel, Horn of Bounty, and we can discard a card to exile the top 2 cards of our library and play those cards this turn. Chandra, Torch of Defiance, is a great planeswalker for 4 mana that says +1, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. If you don't, Chandra deals 2 damage to each opponent. +1 to add 2 red mana. -3, Chandra, Torch of Defiance deals 4 damage to target creature. Or -7, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell. This emblem deals 5 damage to any target. Next up is Commune with Lava, Delayed Blast Fireball, and Dire Fleet Daredevil. Commune with Lava lets you exile X cards from your library, and until your next turn, you may play those cards. Delayed Blast Fireball isn't a exiling card, meaning you can't, you're not exiling cards with it. You can foretell it, meaning you're casting it from exile to get those great effects. So you can deal 2 damage to each opponent and each creature they control, and if it was exiled, you deal 5 damage to each opponent and each creature they control instead. Dire Fleet Daredevil says, first strike, and when Dire Fleet Daredevil enters battlefield, exile target instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard. You may cast that spell this turn. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. If that spell would be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. Next up is Atali Primal Storm, Furious Rise, and Galvantic Relay. Atali Primal Storm says whenever Atali Primal Storm attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. You may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana cost. Furious Rise is an enchantment that says at the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until you exile another card with Furious Rise. And Galvantic Relay says exile the top card of your library. During your next turn, you may play that card. And it also has Storm, meaning if we have a couple other spells that we cast, we can just play this and it just gets cast for every time we've played a spell before this turn. Grim Lavamancer, Gruff rewrites history, and Ignite the Future is next. Grim Lavamancer, for a single red, we can tap exile 2 cards from your graveyard to deal 2 damage to any target. Gruff rewrites history is an instant, and for each player, we choose target non-enchantment, non-land permanent that player controls. Those permanents owners shuffle them into the library, and each player who controlled one of those permanents exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card, then puts the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. Each player may cast the non-land cards exiled without paying its mana cost. This is basically a Chaos Warp, but for everybody. Ignite the Future is next. We exile the top 3 of our library until your next turn. You may play those cards. If a spell was cast from a graveyard, you may play those cards without paying their mana cost, meaning if we get flashback, we can just exile 3 cards and then cast them without paying their mana cost. Inspired Tinkering is at Chemist, and Jessica's Will are next. Inspired Tinkering is a sorcery that says exile the top 3 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards, and then we create 3 treasure tokens. Is it Chemister gains haste, We can pay a red and tap to exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard, and then for 1 and a red, tap, sacrifice Izzet Chemister, cast any number of exiled cards with Izzet Chemister without paying their mana cost. Pretty good card if we can exile a bunch of really good stuff with it. And Jessica's Will, one of the best commander cards ever printed. Choose one. If you control your commander, you can choose both. We can add a red for each card in target player's hand, and then exile the top 3 cards of our library and play them this turn. Kami of Celebration, Keeper of Secrets, and Korvold in the Noble Thief is next. Kami of Celebration says, whenever a modified creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, which works perfectly with our commander because it puts a +1/+1 counter on stuff, and that counts as modified. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Keeper of Secrets has First Strike and Haste, and Symphony of Pain. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, Keeper of Secrets deals damage equal to that spell's converted mana cost to target opponent. And Korvold and the Noble Thief is a saga that says, for 1 and 2, create a treasure token. And then at Saga 3, exile the top 3 cards of target opponent's library. You may play those cards this turn. And this is a good point to break in these exiled cards and say, if you aren't subscribed to my channel, please do so. I put out at least 1 commander video a week, and for this week I'm doing 7. This is episode 6 of 7. So if you're just seeing this right now, go back and watch those other 6 for the Lost Caverns of Ixalan and see what other commander decks I build. I also do all kinds of other videos, and I would really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing. So now let's see Lelia the Blade Reforged light up the stage, and March of Reckless Joy. Lelia the Blade Reforged has haste. Whenever Lelia the Blade Reforged attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from your library and or your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Lelia. Light up the stage has a spectacle cost for a single red, and you may cast that for a spectacle if an opponent lost life this turn. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your turn, you may play those cards. In March of Reckless Joy is X and a red instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may exile any number of red cards from your hand. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled this way. And then we exile the top X cards of your library. You may play up to 2 of those cards until the end of your next turn. Nefelshni, Outpost Siege, and Passion Archaeologist are next, and Nefelshni is a very, very cool exile card because it says whenever you cast a spell from exile, copy it. You may choose a new target for the copy. If it's a permanent spell, the copy gains haste until the beginning of the next end step, and then you sack it. Outpost Siege says, as Outpost Siege enters the battlefield, choose Cons or Dragons. Cons, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your turn, you may play that card. And Dragons, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to any target. And Passionate Archaeologist says, commander creatures you own have, whenever you cast a spell from exile, this creature deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to target opponent. Next up is Plague in Nasiri, Professional Facebreaker, and Prophetic Flame Speaker. Plague in Nasiri is a legendary creature. Orc says, at the beginning of your upkeep, each player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. An opponent chooses a non-land card exiled this way. You may cast up to 2 spells from among the other cards exiled without paying their mana costs. Professional Facebreaker has Menace, and whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. But if you sack a treasure, you can exile the top card of your library and play that card this turn. And Prophetic Flame Speaker has Double Strike and Trample, and whenever Prophetic Flame Speaker deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. Next up is Reckless Impulse, Stolen Strategy, and Sword of Forge and Frontier. Reckless Impulse is a sorcery that says exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. Stolen Strategy is an enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your opponent's library. Until the end of turn, you may cast spells from among those exiled cards, and you may spend mana as though with mana of any color to cast those spells. And Sword of Forge and Frontier is an artifact equipment that gives equipped creature +2/+2 and has protection from red and green. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. You may play an additional land this turn. Tavern Brawler, Throes of Chaos, and Tybalt's Trickery are next. Tavern Brawler says commander creatures you own have, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. This creature gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the card's mana value. You may play that card this turn. Throes of Chaos is a sorcery that has Cascade and Retrace, meaning you can cast a spell from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying its other costs. In Tybalt's Trickery, counters a target spell. You choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. Its controller mills that many cards, then exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card with a different name than that spell. They may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then they may put the exiled cards on the bottom of their library in a random order. Next up is Valkyrie Exploration, Virtue of Courage, and Visions of Phyrexia. Valkyrie Exploration has a landfall trigger that says whenever a land enters battlefield under your control, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. At the beginning of your end step, if there are cards exiled with Valkyrie Exploration, put them into their owner's graveyard. Then Valkyrie Exploration deals that much damage to each opponent. Virtue of Courage is an adventure spell with Emberth Blaze for 1 and a red. Instant adventure, Emberth Blaze deals 2 damage to any target. Then for 3 red, we get an enchantment with whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, you may exile that many cards from the top of your library. You may play those cards this turn. And Visions of Phyrexia, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. At the beginning of your end step, if you didn't play a card exiled this turn, create a tapped Power Stone token. Next up is Wand of Wonder, Wild Magic Surge, and Wild Magic Sorcerer. Wand of Wonder says 4 tap, roll a d20. Each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile an instant or sorcery card. Then shuffle the rest into their library. You may cast up to X instant and sorcery spells from among cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. If you roll a 1 through 9, X is 1. 10 through 19, X is 2. And if you roll a 20, you can cast 3 of those spells. Wild Magic Surge is an instant that says destroy target permanent and opponent controls. Its controller reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a permanent card that shares a card type with that permanent. They put that card onto the battlefield and the rest in the bottom of their library in a random order. In Wild Magic Sorcerer, it says the first spell you cast from exile each turn has Cascade. And lastly, for our exiling cards, we have Ren's Resolve and You Find Some Prisoners. Ren's Resolve is a sorcery that says exile the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards. And You Find Some Prisoners is an instant that says break their chains, destroy target artifact, or interrogate them. Exile the top 3 cards of target opponent's library. Choose one of them until your next turn. You may play that card, and you may spend mana as though it was mana of any color to cast it. The remaining cards in this deck are just some other effects that are either going to help with exile, give you some extra mana, or just speed up how you play this deck. So starting off, we have Abrade, Blasphemous Act, and Bolt Bend. Abrade says choose one. It deals 3 damage to target creature, or we can destroy an artifact. Blasphemous Act costs 1 less to cast for each creature you control, and it deals 13 damage to each creature. Or Bolt Bend says this spell costs 3 less to cast if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, which we probably will. And we change the text of target spell or ability with a single target. So if it's targeting us, we can target somebody else. Next up is Burnished Heart, Chaos Warp, and Commander's Plate. Burnished Heart says 3, sack it, search your library for 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped. Chaos Warp lets us shuffle a card that either we or our opponents control, and then we get to reveal cards off the top of our library until we reveal a permanent card, and we can put it onto the battlefield. And Commander's Plate is really great in this deck because equip creature +3/+3 and has protection from each color that's not in your commander's color identity, which we're just playing a monocolor deck, so we get protection from 4 colors for 4 mana to play and equip, so that seems pretty good. Defiler of Instincts, Dockside Extortionist, and Dualcaster Mage are next. Defiler of Instincts has first strike, and as an additional cost to cast red spells, you can pay 2 life rather than pay a red, and whenever you cast a red permanent spell, it deals 1 damage to any target. Dockside Extortionist enters battlefield and creates X treasure tokens, where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control, giving you a ton of mana to do a lot of stuff with. And Dualcaster Mage has flash, and when it enters, you can copy target instant or sorcery spell and choose a new target for the copy. Next is Kedis, Amberclaw Familiar, Mana Geyser, and Mithril Coat. Kedis, Amberclaw Familiar says whenever a commander you control deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to each other opponent, which should be super great if we make our commander super big. Mana Geyser says add a red for each tapped land your opponents control, and Mithril Coat has flash indestructible, and when Mithril Coat enters battlefield, attach it to target legendary creature you control. Equipped creature has indestructible. We have a couple indestructible creatures, but this would be great to put on our commander to save it. Neheb the Eternal, Ruby Medallion, and Seething Song are next. Neheb the Eternal has Afflict 3, and at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, add 1 red for 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. Ruby Medallion just makes all red spells cost 1 less to cast, and Seething Song adds red for only 3 mana to help us boost and cast spells early. Next up is Sol Ring, Solemn Simulacrum, and Solfim, Mayhem Dominus. Sol Ring, obviously, commander staple. 1 mana tap, 2 mana is very, very good. Solemn Simulacrum enters, we search for a basic land, and then when it dies, we draw a card. And Solfim, Mayhem Dominus says if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. Then 1 red, discard 2 cards, and we can put an indestructible counter on it. We have so many effects that have us deal damage whenever we cast something from exile, that's just gonna ramp that up even more. Torbrand, Thane of Redfell, Urbrask the Hidden, Urbrask, Heretic Creator are next. Torbrand, Thane of Redfell says if a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage +2 instead. Urbrask the Hidden is a creature that gives all other creatures haste, and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. And Urbrask, Heretic Creator, has haste at the beginning of your upkeep. Exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, the next time they would draw a card this turn, instead they exile the top card of the library, and they may play it this turn. And our last card is Vandal Blast. Destroy target artifact you don't control, or overload it to destroy all artifacts you don't control. And that is it. What do you think of this exiling powerhouse of a deck? Inti, whatever his name is. I really like this commander. I think it's really unique for red. I think that all of these cards that we've been getting in the last, 10 sets, let's say, that have you exile stuff have just been powerhouses and have really built this deck up. Because 2 or 3 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to build this deck. But just to see everything that they've come out with since then just makes this a reality and a really, really cool strategy. So thank you for watching. If you have any comments on, hey, you should include this card or take that out because it doesn't work or anything like that, please leave it in the comments down below. I love to see what you all have to say. And also, if you aren't subscribed to my channel, please do so. It would really mean a lot to me. I'm so close to hitting 1,500 and I'm trying to do it by the end of the year. So if you would be a part of that, it would really mean the world. So today's Scryfall card of the day is Kite Sail Cleric. Too flashy to ignore, too fast to catch. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.